My name is John Mundine. I'm really from the northern rivers of New South Wales, the upper rivers of New South Wales. I actually live in a curious place. Curiously, I live in the southern Highlands of New South Wales. So I don't really come from here. As all of you, I'm moved about, etc. However, I'd like to acknowledge, for all of you, to acknowledge our previous, the elders and the people of the land from where you are right now and where we are. We acknowledge the elders that exist in the ether, in fact, who are past and present, and those who are past, of course, often actually exist in this thing called the internet, the ether, that is sacred, really, in a sense, sacred and non-sacred. So that's all I'd like to say. I am not from this place. This is like my grandmother's country, but I acknowledge the people of this land, the Southern Highlands, and all the elders past and present, and any Aboriginal people that are here in this meeting as well. I'd welcome you, and I'd like to be part of. It's great you're in this discussion.
Thank you, John. So that's wonderful to hear John giving us an acknowledgement. And I'll now just tell you a little bit about him, and then I'll hand over to him to speak to you. We will take questions at the end, and I'll just read the questions from you, put them in the chat so I can read what you've written, and then I will ask at the end the questions. And we plan on finishing at 8:30, but we're not absolutely committed to that. If we can go over a little bit if necessary, but we'll see how timing goes. Okay, so I'd like to just a little bit about John. He is John Mundine, OAM, and a proud Bundjalung man from the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. He is a curator, writer, and performer. John Mundine was an art and craft advisor and curator in the proudly traditional Aboriginal communities of Milingimbi in 1979 and Ramingining in Arnhem Land for 16 years. Here he originated Australia's greatest artwork, the Aboriginal Memorial, and you'll be able to see some pictures a bit later on. It was comprising 200 painted funeral poles by 43 artists from Ramingining, and each symbolising a year since the 1788 British invasion for the Sydney Biennale. In 1993, John received the Medal of the Order of Australia for service to the promotion and development of Aboriginal arts, crafts and culture. John Mundine, OAM, also won the Australia Council's 2020 Red Ochre Award for Lifetime Achievement and is currently an independent curator of contemporary Indigenous art and a cultural mentor. And thank you, John, for coming to speak to us. We are very, very fortunate to have you, and I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
No, thank you. I don't know whether you'll be good or bad for coming to speak to you, whether you'll thank me later, but anyway. My name is John Mundine, and we'll repeat that to OAM, which I always say is really means old Aboriginal man, really, as much as it means anything. I was nominated for this award some time ago, and I really struggle with public awards for doing things that you should do. Anyway, it's part of your work. If you take on these particular roles, well, that's your job, and that's what you just do them. And I really took this on because it was pointed out to me by my wife that my parents would really love me to have this, for me to be honoured in this way. So I accepted this curious award. The other award, the Lifetime Achievement, I also was a bit cynical about I was struggling to tell them in my acceptance speech, you know, you think this isn't the golden watch retirement thing, and I wasn't going to cark it on the spot. So I said, basically, I said that it tells you that you've come to a certain point in your life, and I took it to mean it's the second half of my life. Second half of my life. It's the second half of my career as in the arts, and that's how I saw it. It wasn't I was going to retire somewhere, and you know, or anything else. This is just a beginning of the next stage of my life, and that's why I'm doing this thing now. I haven't got the coronavirus, and I'm not likely to, and I think it's great. I can do this without wearing a mask, etc. So I'll go on. This I struggle to find out. Well, when people ask you to speak as an Aboriginal person, you're quite often it's labelled given to you that you are an Aboriginal person, and therefore you'll talk about everything Aboriginal, about you know, Aboriginal bad breath or Aboriginal tinea or whatever, and Aboriginal bad taste in clothes or whatever, etc. Diet and figures on mortality or whatever. I work in the arts, and this is to do with reconciliation. Now, all you learn in the arts, and I think all you learn as you grow older, in fact, is to become two things. You become more hopeful about the world and the fact that we're all still standing, as they say. And we haven't been hit by a major disaster, truthfully, and we are actually enjoying our lives at this stage of the game. Well, from what I can see here, and I have many silver blondes here on the screen in front of me, so I feel I'm at home. I have a common ground in front of me. However, you also come to develop a cynicism about things, about life, and about the hope of others. I mean, you're eternally, you have to be like that Raymond Chandler character, Philip Marlowe, that you're cynically optimistic about the state of the world. So reconciliation is a curious thing for me as an Aboriginal person. I've wondered what it meant. I used to be very much against the idea of this reconciliation because it was someone almost really excruciatingly pointed at me in another talk that it was basically about Aboriginals had to reconcile the fact that they'd lost and they had to get over it and get on with life as something else. I don't know, we go away and become mechanics or become carpenters or something, or some other leather workers or some other curious occupation to go into. And we struggled then to also define how do we fit into the national image of, you know, Paul Hogan type image as Aboriginal people, which made, you know, was very cynical. Now, my own personal memory of to do with reconciliation as a movement or as a government policy or government idea was that in the 1970s or 80s, there was a very intense research project to study what white Australians really thought about Aboriginal people. And in that, the results of that research, which had never been published, it's kept a secret, but essentially it said that Australians are very racist, is what it said. And by racist, I mean that they were very dismissive of Aboriginal cultural values, of Aboriginal society, and very cynical by return about how Aboriginal people should fit into the Australian psyche and the Australian in the national image. So as a result of that, it started a large conversation with a certain group of Aboriginal people about, well, what can we do? Like, they thought about they should spend a large amount of money to in an advertising campaign, a positive advertising and educational campaign to point out to Australians the positive things about Aboriginal history, and also the negative things about Aboriginal history, negative in the colonial history. I mean, the fact that colonial history goes in three phases. There's first of all a sort of a cursory meeting of two cultures or two groups of people. Sometimes, usually it's half accidentally that they brush up against each other. Then that turns, and there's some exchanges that are sort of curiosities rather than anything else, curious sort of examinations of each other. And then there's a whole brutal, repressive, violent period when it becomes clear what the colonial aim is: domination, exploitation, and attempts at annihilation. And then after that, there's a third. The third phase is that there's some sort of sense of, oh, what did we do? Like, how can we bring the dodo back to life? Type of thing. We've nearly annihilated it, or we have annihilated it. How do we bring it back to life? How do we do that? And healing. Oh, you shouldn't, as I wrote somewhere, there's a thing, I said, people always tell me Aboriginal people can never be angry. We should never be bitter. We should never be seek revenge, or we should never be like that. You must never be angered, etc. That's always been told to me. What you are presenting a very negative image, by being this. And I was thinking, well, I'm not Omi Baba or someone, or Baba Ya or something else. I'm not a guru of some sort. I think I need to carry some sense of this past history. It's enormous. The attempt to annihilate Aboriginal people is just enormous. And it's a major thing. So it wasn't just accidental. The last bit of research in Queensland said that there was at least 62,000 Aboriginal people were shot, right? That's people who were shot, not people who died of hunger or died of thirst or died of something like that, or disease. This is about people that were shot. That's the lower estimate. So they take that estimate, the researchers, Raymond Evans and this other man, this Danish researcher, Orsted, they came up with that figure. The maximum figure that they came up with really was something about double that. It was almost about 120,000 at the bigger estimate. But they said, well, we won't put that forward. It's 60,000, say, right? Which is more than the Australians killed in the First World War. These are large figures. That's a large figure, and that was in Queensland alone. So if you multiply that by 6, there are 6 states in Australia. Even at the 60 level, that's an enormous number of people that were shot. That's what I keep saying. They were shot, not murdered. They were murdered, but they were shot. Not people who died, or children that died because they didn't have any parents to look after them afterwards, or so on. So those are enormous figures. So what we then had, instead of this educational program, we've got a an educational program light, Reconciliation Australia, which I'm told, I don't know why they came up with this word, but anyway, but I'm told from the website, it's about strengthening relationships between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in the nation state. Kirsty Parker, who's I know very well, who's a good person, said a reconciled Australia is one where our Aboriginal rights as first Australians are not just respected, but they're actually championed in all the places that matter. And it sort of says that what she's trying to get at, in a sense, that if you think of what an Australian is, you have to somehow develop a character that is Aboriginal. Most Aboriginal people in the southeast, at least, like myself, are of mixed descent. I used to think, and I used to describe myself as part of me is black and part of me is white. But of course, part of me is Aboriginal, part of me is Bundjalung, and part of me is Irish from Southern Ireland. I'm from the Donovan clan, my Irish side. So for a stage, I kept getting invited to attend Irish events, to talk at the Bloomsday event, where to read something out of Ulysses, James Joyce, Ulysses, and I did quite a bit of research into Irish history, Irish spiritual beliefs, etc., and just the Irish history. Now, Ireland, as you would know, Ireland and Scotland also, that they have this thing called the United Kingdom. Now, it was only united because they went and killed all these people, the English. They actually went and killed possibly about 500,000 people in Scotland. About the time that Captain Cook came here was the Highland Clearances, as called, were taking place. And it's estimated somewhere, I read that possibly up to 400,000 people died in that clearance. So they call it a clearance. Well, in Australia, we had this thing in Queensland they called dispersing. They used the word dispersing. It was a word they used. And it meant clearing the land. And it's almost an identical process in Scotland and Ireland. In the process, they moved people off the land to set up estates, squatters, not squatters, but a nobility estates that ran sheep and cattle, and made a mozza, as they say, made a mint out of two things, out of pushing the people off the land and causing deaths and despair, etc. And the other side of it, by pushing them off the land, and then also fucking up the environment in the process. So it happened here then. That was just repeating it. So people got huge bits of land given to them here, where they then decided, well, we'll clear the land of all the Aboriginals so we can put sheep in. And Australia, as you, I think, in just looking at you people, would have lived in this time where we lived off the sheep's back, or whatever it was called. Unlike New Zealand, when they lived off the sheep's back in another way, but we lived off the sheep's back. So, how do you do these things? Like, they have 5 points in this reconciliation group. They talk about race relations. Well, overall, the whole thing about reconciliation and about attempting to ingrain or weave Aboriginal people back into the national character into the national definition of a personality, of a psyche, and dare I say it, an intelligentsia. You know that when not James Joyce, who is the guy that wrote Lady Chatterley's Lover? Can you talk back or you can't? No. Well, the man who wrote Lady Chatterley's Lover, that famous book that I'm sure you've all smuggled into the country when you were younger, or read smuggled in versions of it because it was banned here, that book, when he came here, he wrote a book here about Australia called Kangaroo. And I don't know, you can put your hand up. Is anyone who read that at all? No? Oh, one person. Yes, thank you. Or whatever. Two. Yeah, hang on. This is interesting. So a couple of people have read it. But basically in that book, he talked about this character called Kangaroo. And he was part of a group that's supposed to be the intelligentsia of Australia. And it's like that old joke about Australia and Australian intelligentsia being two mutually exclusive terms. But that's basically what he said in the novel, that these people were operating at such a low level of intellectual discussion. It was just tragic, the way Australia was trying to see themselves, how they were seeing, how they fitted into the world, how they saw the truth of their existence. So these race relations about how do we value Aboriginal society's cultural rights, cultural practices, about our rights, our human rights, and how do we respect and trust each other. So those things are really important in getting some level of reconciliation. They also talk about reconciliation is about equality and equity in life opportunities, etc. So that's why you keep getting this thing called closing the gap, about economic activities, about creating possibly a bourgeois class of some sort of elite. Now, all these things have been done in other colonies in Africa and India and whatever. And I know someone told me I must be a bourgeois person. I must be a petty bourgeois person. I certainly don't have the money or whatever that goes with being bourgeois, the petty bourgeois class. Because I could I bought a bottle of wine to drink at dinner rather than a six-pack or whatever, or a long neck beer. So those things to create some sort of middle class, possibly. Maybe that will solve some of these problems. Maybe that will close the gap between rich and poor, and it will close the gap between the number of children that die, etc. Those figures that are around now about children that will die before, Aboriginal children that will die before they come to the age of 4, it's something like double the number, the likelihood of non-Aboriginal people. An Aboriginal child in 2020 will die before the age of 4. These are pretty horrendous things. Recently, in the last few, since I lived at Ramingining, etc., in Arnhem Land, where the actor David Gulpilil lives. When I decided to leave there, I decided to go to the doctor and get a full health check. One of the things I asked for was, could they do a check for, hepatitis, blood, tuberculosis, all those things that if I went to a third world country, I would go and have those things. I'd have injections to inoculate me against all these diseases. I also asked them, could I have a check for leprosy? Now, I've never found a doctor that will give me that check for leprosy. Now, I worked with at least half a dozen artists in very close proximity They worked in the Aboriginal Art Centre I worked in. I travelled with them overseas. We shared beds, we shared facilities, etc., etc. Some of them had been in what was called the leprosarium, this place in Darwin that's now closed, but they lived in that place. But these doctors just fell on the ground laughing at me. Why would you want to be checked for leprosy? You know, there's no such thing in Australia. There's no such thing. But these people were my age, but they'd been in the Darwin leprosarium within, post-World War II, I'm talking about, not the turn of the century, 1900. So it was just really, really these things are what we're trying to change. We talk about institutional things, about institutional people, institutions learning to treat people with integrity, try to treat people as normal human beings, if there is such a thing. How we have to have a unity as a nation, and that we have to have a truth telling of, yes, the nation did try to annihilate Aboriginal people. We killed, 500,000 people, murdered, not killed. That's a stupid term. What I liked, there was a program about the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, and what I liked about it was that the person giving that talk just said these people were murdered. He didn't say they died in the gas chambers. He said they were murdered. And that's how you've got to think about it, to murder those people. If there were the famous one of the Mile Creek Massacre, 38 people or whatever, they were murdered. Don't think about don't use the word killed. That's just stupid to say, oh, they were killed. It's like they got killed in a road accident or something, or, a bloody koala bear fell on them or something. They didn't. They were murdered. So you've got to use those terms when you're talking about this thing. Now, I work in the field of arts by accident. When I was about 12, my mother said I could draw really well. It seemed like I could draw a picture. I was untrained as an art person, but I could do all that, draw and paint reasonably well. I got a set of watercolors, paints for Christmas, and I could do that. So it was that I would become my mother thought, oh, you'll become an artist one day, son. And I sort of said, yeah, well, maybe. But when I went to school, I learned I was very good with figures, with mathematics, with figures. I could do a lot of calculations in my head. Therefore, when I did bar work, I could keep, 10 beers and 3 gin and tonics and whatever. I could keep that all in my head. And then when I went to the cash register, I automatically had a figure in my head. So I could just say, yeah, give me the $10 or give me $20 and give people the change. That's about the only thing that I could think of as a great advantage of that I could calculate that, or I could take 3 orders at once and do them and have the figure work all in my head. The other, the thing was I went on to train at university. I got into university at Macquarie University. I went on to train as an accountant, believe it or not, right? And if they had an MBA in those days, I most probably would have did an MBA. But when I went to university, it didn't make it. Just doing all this stupid. The reigning philosophy in economics was Reaganomics. At that time, that sort of stupid trickle down economics, etc. that didn't make any sense then, doesn't make any sense now, and I can tell you it certainly didn't make any bloody sense then. And that we could, people could just tinker with the economy with all these algebraic equations, and therefore they could do this and that to trigger the economy. So after 2 years of that, I got into second year in economics, but I also did a number of other subjects, an introduction to anthropology, even though I'm not a living subject anyway, of anthropology, and an introduction to psychology and so on. And this triggered other things within me, and there was an introduction to political theory, and they triggered memories more than anything else. I dropped out at that stage. I got a job in an importing company to import chemicals into Australia. They had licenses to import various chemicals into Australia. And then had another go at going back to university. And you must probably know that 50% of people who go to university drop out. It's not my father thought that was a terrible thing, really, that happened. He thought, was very disappointed in that. But a lot of people drop out of university. So I then worked there and a million other jobs. And eventually there was a company that sold Aboriginal art, set up as a spark from the Whitlam government. They set up two things. They funded community arts offices in Aboriginal communities right across Australia, but mainly in the north of Australia, but right across Australia, really. And they also set up a company to market Aboriginal art, and they were given this huge job of breaking Aboriginal art into the fine art market. Now, that was, even at that stage, there wasn't, the Australian intelligentsia weren't actually sure about Aboriginal art. They didn't have a position on it, etc. But I worked with them for a period, and then I applied for a job in Millingimby, which is near Remengining, and I went there and worked there at the coalface with artists, etc. In a very traditional living community. People spoke their own language. They carried on really large religious ceremonies the whole year. There was a whole cycle that went on year after year of lots of people coming together, thousands of people coming together for some ceremonies in a belief that this, by singing to the ether or singing to God, they could bring the next cycle of life continue the cycle of life, the cycle of the environment, etc. So a lot of people who worked in that position really were just about closing the gap economically. They would just set up almost sheltered workshops and try to get people to really pump out paintings, pump out artworks, pump out paintings, woven items, etc., that they could sell as fast as they could. They could pump it out in large numbers, but that would also mean the prices weren't large. They would just pump these things out rather than trying to get into the intellectual life of Australia. So as someone from the southeast, I attempted I wanted to put exhibitions and arrangements of art together that were around ideas, etc., that would change the attitude of non-Aboriginal people towards Aboriginal art. People in the art world in Australia were also unsure whether they should use Western terms to discuss or describe Aboriginal art. And lots of academics and that would say, well, you can't really use those terms about colour or composition or whatever. But I said, well, if people were going to discuss or read Aboriginal art, they would have to use this cross language, this art terms, and appreciate things because of the intelligence of the beauty of the composition, the beauty of the colours, the clever way that people arrange figures, etc. There was also the argument within white Australia, if I call it that, you people out here with a few members, differences, that the biggest discussion in Australian art at that time was a huge argument between figurative art and abstract art. And that was going on really intensely in the 70s when you had other things come in like conceptual art, performance art, and whether that was real art as against drawing a human figure, a portrait or something, or a landscape. That was going on very intensely in white Australian art. And that was also coloured the way people valued Aboriginal art as well. So within the community that I worked, the position I had, community art advisor, my colleagues who were in other communities, we had these discussions also about what made a great artwork. And we weren't all art trained either. None of us, in fact, very few of us were art trained. Few of us had gone to an art school or completed a degree at university in art history. So all this was things that we did on the job. You had to keep reading Western art history. You had to keep reading widely as much as you could in the time about the history of the world, or the colonial history of things, and how post-colonialism, which was arriving in the academic world and it arrived in the real world, so to speak, post-colonial theory, post-colonial fact, you had to keep up with that. And so I tried to do that by putting out, if we were going to sell things from where I was, the artists were going to create things or stories to tell. They would be around ideas and about the history I've just talked about the fact that 100,000 people were murdered in Queensland in the 1800s. See, a friend of mine, there's a woman, Fiona Foley, who's an artist. She's a bachelor person from Fraser Island. Now, the problem is with them, as with a lot of Aboriginal people, there were no, we know, I'm saying it's tongue in cheek, we know there were no Aboriginal people on Fraser Island. There just weren't. Well, I can tell you why they fucking weren't, because in the 1850s, they tried to kill all the people on Fraser Island. They sent a police force there to wipe out all the Aboriginal people who were on Fraser Island. Now, we know about people, really important people like Mrs. Fraser. They made films, like feature films about the important things that she did. She did such incredible, great social deeds. She changed the way we think about the world. Her philosophy of a sideshow alley character is just, such a high-level intelligentsia in Australia. But they've made 2 films, full-length feature films about her. No one's made a film about the attempt to annihilate all the Aboriginal people on Fraser Island. They killed 40 people in one day on that island in the 1850s. So that's why it appears that there's no Aboriginal people on Fraser Island, because they tried to murder everyone and then took the other people, the survivors, they took them away to a Christian mission on the mainland. So that was another clearing the land. I'll get back to where I started to before. She's an artist, so a lot of her work is about that there were Aboriginal people living on Fraser Island, as it's called. Kagari is the name of it in Bachelor. And recently, this year, in fact, there was an exhibition I put together about her work, and she had somebody sing a song. There was a song that they composed, the Bachelor people composed in 1770 when they saw Captain Cook go past. There's a song about this boat arriving and going past, and it's about two racers looking at each other. Banks and Cook were looking, and they said, in that manner, they said, "Oh, we saw all these Indians on the headland of Fraser Island." What's now, Kagari. They saw all these Indians, as they wrote down, because they came from east to west, and they knew India was somewhere in the west. So that's what they call these people Indians. They're Aboriginal people, of course, they're Bachelor people. And talked about, they wrote down, yes, we noticed all these Indians. And that place that they saw them is called Indian Point, or Indian Headland. To this day, it's in the map, on the map. This is Indian Headland. But the Bachelor people composed a song and said they saw this thing coming out. They thought it was a cloud, and it came up closer and closer, and then they could see these people climbing up and down in the rigging. And they went from south to north along Kagari, Fraser Island, and they were worried because they were heading for a reef. They were going to run aground if they weren't careful. So they were just watching this for this spectacle to happen, where these people would run aground on a reef. But they didn't. They did that up the road a bit further up the coast, near Cairns. So these people, the Aboriginal people were documenting Cook as much as Cook was documenting them. So she was able to, in 2020, the 250th anniversary of Cook coming here, that they were observing him. They could sing that song, and she did. She got an Aboriginal, Bachelor Aboriginal woman to sing this song with a modern beat, and made it into an artwork about seeing Captain Cook go past. Now, it's an interesting thing. This is 250 years now since Captain Cook came here. Now, Captain Cook, we talk about our honest people in history. He's wasn't really from the nobility. He was a lower class person than that. So I don't blame him in one way. But again, it's about the Australian intelligentsia. It's 250 years. Now, I read somewhere that from a numerologist that 250 is 2 plus 5 plus 0 equals 7. And 7 in numerology is a number of reflection and really reflecting on what happened. So it's a time for all of us to reflect on what happened. Why did he come here? I just wish people would get it right. When Captain Cook, well, it was Lieutenant Cook, came here, Australia, as it's now called, really already had a European name. They say it was the first person he discovered Australia. It was actually called New Holland, is what it was called, and it appeared on maps as New Holland. They'd already named the northern part of Australia. That's why we're called Arnhem Land, after the town Arnhem. A Dutch boat called the Arnhem, sailed along the north of Australia and named a number of bits of land and prominent pieces of landscape, etc., after Dutch names. Now, that map already existed when Cook arrived here, so how he'd saying, you know, I discovered Australia is like, you know, getting the Gregories out and discovering Bowral, yeah, or something, or I discovered Dapto or something. Yeah, I named the, you know, I claimed this land because no one else had done it. So he wasn't the first European to come here, but he wasn't even the first English person to come here. These other English people had arrived off the west coast of Australia. There were Spanish people, there were Portuguese, etc. Had all been around Australia. It was Captain Cook, though, who people still say, look, just put the plaque right. You know, he wasn't the first Englishman to come here. He wasn't the first European to come here. And as for his claiming the land, he landed twice going up the coast of Australia. The coast of Australia must be, what, 5,000, how many thousand kilometres the east coast must be. He landed in Botany Bay, and he only landed once more when he had the nautical equivalent of a flat tyre. He ran aground of what's now called Cairns, and he ran aground there. Otherwise, he wouldn't have even stopped there. But when he got to the top of the top of Cape York, he landed on an island again that already had a name, really, and he called it Possession Island. This is Possession Island, and he claimed the whole east coast. So, so that's a minor truth-telling thing, as against the 100,000 people who were murdered in Queensland, or the 500,000 whatever people that were murdered in the colonial times. So maybe within this reconciliation, there's a piece here. One of these 5 pieces is the 5th one, the acceptance of the past, the truth of the past. So if we are going to have reconciliation, we must, as a nation, that is, Aboriginal people said are slightly cynical about reconciliation, more than cynical. But if we are going to have this reconciliation, it has to be a bit of truth-telling, most probably in the South African model of truth-telling. And that's why I used the quote of, which maybe was put there, I don't know whether it was or not, but in the publicity from the Caribbean intellectual Edouard Glissant, this group of intellectuals that came together. They're really French speakers. They were grandchildren of former slaves that were sent to the Caribbean to harvest sugar, that drug sugar, that people made squillions out of for hundreds of years. They're the people that decided or created the idea of what they call negritude, of being conscious of being a positive consciousness of being a black person. That they created that thing of the Black is Beautiful movement. And he wrote, he only died in the 1990s, really. He's the last of that group. And he said, look, if we are going to have a reconciliation of some sort, if we are going to have a justice, everyone has to recognise the other in this conversation, if we're having it, that we must remember the past together. Otherwise, you end up like with contemporary political movements, I mean, the current political movements in Australia, where one group that takes over, the first thing they do is exact revenge on the other, the people who lost the revolution. So every revolution that happens, the people who win the revolution attack the bloody other people to try to rub them out. That we must have a conversation together, but it has to be an honest conversation. So one of the things that happens in my lifetime and my experience is after these things that I've been talking about, the numbers of people murdered, the dispossession of Aboriginal people, are pretty undisputed facts, I would have thought now. Yet we still have the thing where the mine, that sacred site, was blown up. These are crimes against humanity. They're not just crimes against Australia. They're not just crimes against Aboriginal people. They're crimes against humanity. It'd be unbelievable that these are tens of thousands of years old, all these things that are records of human endeavour. Now, beyond the fact we might have black skin or brown skin, we're also human beings. I won't do a Shylock on you. Do we not bleed or whatever? But we also bleed. We are human beings. And anything we do is a contribution to the intellectual life of human beings. It's a contribution to the history of the world of human beings. So if you think that way, it's Australians. Yeah, I'll get back to the thing. The guy who wrote Lady
John, we are going to have to finish off, so just another minute or so, okay?
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
No, just finish off.
No, that's how I finish. I'll just shut up now. But no. So those things is what I've strived to do. I'll just say two things, two sentences. One was in 1988, I worked on a project. I was asked to take part in the bicentenary celebrations. So I talked to the artist at Remenginning, where they lived at Remenginning. There are also massacres there in that swamp where the 10 Canoes film was filmed. They tried to wipe out all the Aboriginal people in that district, the cattlemen who set up a cattle station there about the time of Federation, when Australia became, Queen Victoria allowed us to become a nation, which is really great. And she wrote that in her own hand, it says on the document, so she could read and write. They tried to annihilate all those people around Remenginning and the Arafura swamp. So I talked to artists and we put together what came to be known as the Aboriginal Memorial, 200 burial poles that I negotiated to be placed permanently on display in the National Gallery of Australia. So when you go to the National Gallery, just inside the door, you'll see those 200 poles still there. And they were made as a bit of truth-telling. This is where all national art begins. The history of the nation's art begins there with Aboriginal art and with those dead people, our families, and our forebears. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think everyone's clapping that we've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. I have got some questions, so I'll ask some of these questions. I've just been asked to go to Georgina's. Okay, so Georgina asks, reconciliation assumes there was a relationship with in the first place, but we are yet to form a genuine and respectful relationship with our First Nations peoples. indeed through culturally integral processes. Please comment on this and your thoughts on treaties.
I'm again, I said I'm an optimistic cynic about everything. In my life as an artist and art curator, I strived to and fought for and succeeded. We are now, every institution, a cultural institution, has an Aboriginal person attached to it, right? So these are positive things. It's up to that individual Aboriginal person to try to do that, try to insert or influence that institution. It's not always successful. The person can be overwhelmed by just the job you have to do, the endeavor the responsibility that you carry can really drive you to bloody madness. Let alone just trying to translate Aboriginal ideas into Western ideas and vice versa. But I do think you've got to think this way. Look, every crime that happens, bluntly, it's a relationship, for better or worse. The victim and the perpetrator are in a relationship. If they weren't before, they after the act of violence, they certainly are. It may be a bad relationship, but that's part of the reconciliation of every crime, that everyone in jail has got to go through that and think about, well, I did that. I did that to that person. Why did I do that? And what was I possibly thinking when I did it? And how can I make restitution?
Thank you. Just a comment from Phil. His view on reconciliation is that non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people need to reconcile with the truth of past and ongoing injustices imposed by us and our forebears. This must then be matched by our actions to try to overcome these injustices as guided by our First Nations people. Do you have a comment on that?
It's a very big question. There's people are saying, look, when Malcolm Fraser was in power, most probably in your lifetime there, he set up a thing called the National Aboriginal Conference, and he had a committee of people who gave him advice. Apparently, he and his government didn't have to take that advice. In fact, they set up. They gave land rights to some degree in the Northern Territory to Aboriginal people, but they didn't take it into the states or force it onto the states. They then forced the people in Western Arnhem Land to have a uranium mine. And if you see this film called Dirt Cheap that was made, watch the Commonwealth government browbeat and really browbeat the people to sign that agreement. If they'd slapped people, it couldn't have been any worse how they yelled at them. So it's got to, maybe we've moved a bit further, but I don't know. It's all right. So that's even though there were land rights, this guy could, the government minister could turn up and virtually slap people around and say, sign this agreement so that we can have a uranium mine there.
Thank you. Klaus's comment was that some deaths in custody could be classified as murder. I'd say probably most of them.
Definitely. Look, I said there were X 100,000 people murdered in the colonial war. It's a continuation of the war. That's all. And they're killing us again in another way. That's all. Well, they kill us by neglect, etc. So people don't have the right food, they don't have the right health, even though there's been measures, and the money, the inequity in money is what leads to crime, and through various ways. It's not that we're prone to crime or we are criminals. You just think about it. business the other day with the woman that was on the train. There's an adult woman on the train. She's apparently fell asleep on the train. Now, I fell asleep on the train. I think half of my friends at university, or more than that, have fell asleep on the train. They got drunk. They fell asleep on the train going home. She ended up dying in prison. They took her away, put her in prison, and they didn't look after her. It's unbelievable. Just that could happen in 2020, or it was last year. But that you're in, what is it? Her Majesty's care. If I saw some older woman or older person, you try to take them home, not take them to jail. It's that kind of thing, surely. Anyway, I'm drifting off a bit.
That's okay. Another question. People today are dying under 13 years of ongoing Northern Territory intervention. People are being coerced off country under ongoing colonialisation. Land is opened up for mining under federal policies. Today is 13 years and 4 months since the shocking neo-colonial assimilation. Assimilationist, paternalistic and overtly racist policy has been imposed. It has caused profound damage, disempowerment. Can you also comment on the Northern Territory intervention?
Yes. Well, where I lived in both the town, I lived in three communities or villages there. One was Milingimbi, which was a Methodist mission originally. Remenginning, which wasn't a Methodist mission, it was a government set up place, and Menangrida. Now, Menangrida, those people decided that they could have alcohol, but Milingimbi and Remenginning, in all the years I was there, they had numerous visits by by judges, by politicians, to ask them, did you want alcohol or not alcohol? And everyone would just say, in a vast majority, we don't want alcohol here. And when that intervention came there, the army officer said, we're here. They forced everyone basically to come to a meeting. And he said, we're here to stop the grog. We're here to stop this. And somebody, an Aboriginal man said, one of the community said, what did you say? And he said, we're here to stop the grog. And he said, we made that decision fucking 20 years ago. And just think of this, they made that decision and policed it without a police station. There was no police station when I lived there. In 2007, when the intervention happened, they spent something like $14 million building a police station and a courthouse. So did they build a children's hospital? Did they make sure a doctor was there? Anything like that? Or did they build a bigger school? No, they built a police station and a courthouse and a flash house where the judge could come and stay. He wouldn't live there, of course. He would come and visit for court cases. That's what the intervention brought to Remenginning, a place that policed their non-alcoholic state of the community by themselves. And it's people can act and do act very much in their interest and in the interest of their life. They want to live a better life in all respects, in health-wise and just their social life and the culture that they were living under for whatever 50,000 years. So that's a really incredible thing. When I went there last time, there's a ceremony going on just out of town, which is what happens. This ceremony was going on, and certain singers you could hear people singing, and about more than half of the Aboriginal women, most of the Aboriginal women in town would sing in response. Even though they were in the town and going about their business, they would join in and sing in their response. And I was just standing on the veranda of the art shop and thinking, that's really great, that ceremony's on. Been going on for hundreds of years. and I saw about a dozen non-Aboriginal staff come running down the road with what they call a boot camp instructor, running them through exercises and whatever. And this other thing was going on. They were totally oblivious to it. It was just nutty. I just couldn't believe it. How they're trying to turn Remengenning into a white, Crocodile Dundee type town. That's instead of what it was, this very cultured place, a really community-minded place, etc. Anyway, sorry, that's
okay. Thank
an
you.
anecdote towards it. Yeah.
A question from Ian. Can you share your thoughts on the Uluru Statement and the push for a voice?
I think, look, I'm a bit, I keep saying I'm a bit more of a cynic. I think that was nice. I don't know how you got invited to go to Uluru to discuss that. That was part of the problem I had was, well, I didn't get invited. I don't belong particularly to an Aboriginal institution or a community group. I'm part of a community, but I don't hold an office. I'm not the secretary of the local health centre or any of that stuff. So I wasn't invited. I just wondered how you were invited. I think the voice of Parliament is too tame. You've got to have things like in Canada or New Zealand, they actually have dedicated seats in Parliament. Jackie Lambie holds a lot of power. So does, what's her name? The other one, the other woman from
Queensland.
Pauline Hanson.
Pauline Hanson.
They hold a lot of power, right? Being outside the major power. So if you have dedicated seats in Parliament or the Senate, you can hold a lot of power. And they do a lot. So if you had dedicated Aboriginal seats in Parliament, that would give people much more power than a voice to Parliament that doesn't really, well, depends on government funding. And saw how the ABC and SBS and the ICAC, how the government can shut up people very quickly, make it impossible to shut up voices, and they could shut up Aboriginal voices very easily. And the things like the intervention show you that the government they don't care about whether they look like a bunch of racist arseholes at all. It's just, who cares? We're happy. We're in government. As Scott Morrison will tell you, we were elected. We won government. You think, yeah, by one seat. So therefore, we could cut down every tree in Australia. We won government. We have a mandate to do that. That's how stupid and brain dead. But what do they call that when they don't acknowledge that almost the same number of people voted against them? And so if they are going to operate for the benefit of the country, they've got to think wider than what they're doing. They're going to cut down all the trees and kill all the koalas. But who cares? Well, we won government. That doesn't matter. So they would do that to the voice to Parliament. They would do that as well. That's my opinion. I think that I'm a lone Aboriginal person. I'm sure there are other people who are much more hopeful and optimistic than me. But the history of things like the intervention, etc., certainly show you that they couldn't care less. Sorry. Oh, we're gone.
No, that's okay. Thank you. Another question from Marie and Richard. That was a wonderful talk. Thank you. Could you share what you see as the next necessary steps towards equity and justice and truth-telling?
Well, most probably it'll go into the people who are pushing for the voice to Parliament have a plan. It's true. Yes, I'm very cynical, but you have to be optimistic. They say they have a plan that they will start, the Voice to Parliament will start a national discussion. Then they will arrive at a treaty that gives Aboriginal people certain rights, etc. One day I was in Adelaide, and I think it was on grand final day. We were watching the grand final in this pub, and I had a conversation with a non-Aboriginal Australian, and I said I wanted to start a petition about Aboriginal people make up 3% of the population. Why doesn't the government set aside 3% of the gross national product every year to give to Aboriginal people? And he said, "Oh, well, we couldn't do that, And I said, "Well, why not? It's they most probably give it to every mining company and all these other arseholes, and the white nationalists, the people that are going to kill all the koalas, they must probably give them that amount of money." And he was going, right. And I said, well, if you give that to an Aboriginal body, you have to believe then we will, have these problems of health and etc. But you have to believe that then we can look after that. We will decide where that money goes. And of course, somebody might grab it and run off to Switzerland or something. But you've got to have a belief that you've got to give us responsibility to look after ourselves to some degree. It's just that. And he said, what? And you'd get that money for the rest of the history. I said, yes, that's right. You'd get it for the rest of the history. It's like paying the rent. The thing, what Aboriginal people have given, the different nations of Aboriginal people have given to the state of Australia is 7.5 million square kilometres of real estate. Now, is the biggest thing that Australia makes is trading in real estate. That's all they fucking do. They haven't got a brain in their head. They could bloody invent anything. They could sell to the Chinese or something. Well, that's too hard. You've got to actually do something. You've got to think, and you've got to, put money into it and gamble, so to speak. They'll gamble. Australians will gamble on everything else. They won't gamble on anything, an invention of any sort. But that's why you buy property, because it's not a gamble. That'll just go up, and then you make sure you elect the government so that they'll work out ways to make that property go up and up and up. You can put a McDonald's on it or something. You can make the value go up. It's this shallow line of thinking. That's where most of the money is, and it's dead investment. It's dead money. Usually it destroys the environment. It does something that devalues and destroys the environment in some incremental way. And it is money that's dead money. It's so frustrating. And that it's taken till after most probably the 70s for Australians to get that spark of genius. Wow, we could buy all this property. We could buy a second property, or we could buy an investment property, or 4 or 5. And then we'll sit on that nest egg. Like, that is such a great thing of ingenious. You can see, it's just amazing. But you don't actually make anything. What is that thing? The Chinese, there's that myth. It's not a myth, it's an urban myth about the Australian Chinese guy who started the solar panel company, and no one here wanted to put money into it. So he went to China, and he's a billionaire now selling solar panels in China to the Chinese, because we're too stupid to fucking,
We are doing some things in Australia.
we're doing lots of things.
Look, one of our
I've
group
got
has
solar
asked,
panels too. Yeah.
we have to finish soon, so I'll just very quickly. One of our group has asked, what would you like our group a group like ours to focus our energy on now? What do you think would be really important for a reconciliation group to do?
There's 30 years ago, I tried to put a public artwork in along the Tarpian Way, which is the cliff face that goes along to the Opera House. I tried to put a public artwork there. People were just stunned, that just couldn't believe. They said, "What are you trying to do? What are you trying to do?" And I was saying, "I want to put an artwork on that thing." And they said, but they were just thinking, that's impossible. You can't do that. How can you do that? So I have a petition that's on my website. It's John Mundine, all lowercase, DJONMUNDINE.com. There's a petition it'll go to Gladys and other people to get that to actually happen. I don't want it. I worked with an architect and other people and a stonemason. We didn't want any money out of it. We don't want a commission or anything. We just want the thing to happen. Nowadays, they're talking about putting up bronze statues of Aborigines everywhere. I don't know whether they'll be naked or not naked or whatever, or who's going to pose for them or model them, and who's going to actually make them. I doubt if it's Aboriginal people. I don't know many Aboriginal bronze foundries, so they're going to put up bronze statues everywhere to Aborigines. That's the latest thought. So after 30 years, we say that Aboriginal people have infected Australian society, non-Aboriginal Australian society. I think Aboriginal people have been infected by non-Aboriginal Australians because that artwork there's 1 million people go past that cliff face every year. But you know what? I'm told it's a historic site. It didn't exist until 1898. It was a slope that went down to the harbour, but then they cut the rock and cut that cliff face in there. So somehow that's become an historic site. I don't know how, and therefore I'm not allowed to create Aboriginal art on Aboriginal land. As we keep saying, I did an acknowledgement of country, but then it comes to, well, I actually want to do something there. Well, that you can't do that, of course, because that's an historic site. So that's how it works. So if you did that for me, that would be doing something for Aboriginal people. I'm an Aboriginal person. The other thing is to support although I've been very argumentative, to support those people with the voice to Parliament, because that will wither otherwise. It will really wither. The present government doesn't even believe there's going to be fires this year. There's already been a fire that broke out on North Head, right in the middle of Sydney, but they don't believe there's going to be another round of fires this year, and etc. And they believe that fracking gas. Take up the fracking argument. That when they talk about the gas-led recovery, they're not talking about pumping the gas from offshore in WA to here. They're talking about fracking the water table around out near in Western New South Wales.
Right.
Yeah, and they're talking about fracking the Northern Territory. You see every image of the Northern Territory, how beautiful it is, etc. They're going to poison the fucking water table.
Yes.
They'll fuck up everything. Don't worry, it's fine. Until it's got a big, the golden arches and whatever. Why do you need anything else? Why do you need 2 brain cells? They just make you think and they cause problems.
Can I say people power can make a difference? I don't know whether it'll do it this time, but people power can make a difference.
Well, I'm a big believer in fighting that, because and certainly I'm told the National Farmers Federation also came out against the thing in Western New South Wales. And I know the people in Arnhem Land and that they're against the fracking taking place in Arnhem Land.
Okay, look, I think we're running out of time, but I'm going to just say that some comment from Bernadette was nothing but weapons of gas destruction, stop fracking. So she's very supportive of you. But somebody else wrote, we can't produce solar panels because we're too busy with the prison industry.
Yes, that's right. Yes, and that's very hard, soul destroying. I worked in one prison. There were people who weren't really intelligent. They had a special wing for them. I don't know what the term used now for people who are mentally challenged. And I went into that wing and just said, these people just should not be here. It was like something out of the 1800s. It was, I said, what are these people doing here? They were so mentally challenged. And lots of Aboriginal people in that group, in all the prison. Yeah. It was, well, the whole thing is depressing, but anyway. But that wing, especially for me, just thought, I don't know why they're here. Yeah.
Thank you very much, John. We had lots of words of wisdom there, and we have recorded it, so people who missed out today can actually get that recording and hear the comments. And we do appreciate your giving up your time and coming to speak to us. And thank you very, very much.
There is a chance I'll be sued, but yeah.
Well, we hope not. Just before I close off, I want to just say that we have another. Yes, people are clapping, so thank you very much. And but next week we have Linda June Coe. She's a Wiradjuri woman, and she will be speaking on treaty where to from here. So if you've enjoyed tonight, please come along next week, and you could tell your friends also about it. And as you know, you go to Eventbrite to book, and it's a free event. And we really appreciate all our speakers, and they've been fantastic. Thank you so much for your words of wisdom. And I think we're going to finish. So thanks everybody for coming, and we will hopefully see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah. Never give up.
Thank you. That's a really good.
Never give up.
Yes, we'll keep that motto. I think that.
Be positive.
I think that we're going to be closed down by our tech person, but if he doesn't close us, we can keep talking. Did I miss one of? Oh, yes, somebody put a reference in there. Please do not use the word Uluru in association with a statement from the heart, as requested by elders at Mutijula. So there's a website there if people want to go and have a look at that. I won't get into the discussion. I'll leave it up to people to form their own opinions.
Yes.
Yes. And